All right. Well, this is the second in a new series I'm doing where I'm interviewing people inside and around the film industry. So, this conversation that three of us are going to have tonight is going to center around the world of animation. Why animation, do you ask? Well, animated movies and their merits regularly come up on my main show where I revise Oscars of the past. So, I wanted to explore this a little bit further because it feels like every time I have a guest on, we talk about, what does a director of an animated film do? Like, how do we recognize animated voice actors compared to regular actors? There are all these conversations. My co-interviewer Britt, who's here right now, she has been a part of some of those conversations.
So many opinions about everything you just said right now.
We're gonna have a whole bunch of discussions about animation, but I feel like a noob sometimes when it comes to like what goes into an animated film. So I wanted to explore this a little bit further, which brings me to the guest of the hour here. So let me introduce you to our guest. He's the author of Bright and Shiny, A History of Animation at Award Shows. Volumes 1 and 2 are both available to purchase on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you get your books. Volume 3 will be releasing soon. He's also a member of the Phoenix Critics Society and the Hollywood Creative Alliance. He's been professionally writing movies for 15 years. You can find his work on Watch Mojo, Miss Mojo, Flickreel.com, CartoonContender.com, and of course Letterboxd. And his first 5-star review was all the way back at the age of 3 when he saw The Nightmare Before Christmas, a wonderful choice for a 5-star review.
Legit.
You can't beat it.
Great job.
Please welcome Nick Spake. Nick, thanks for being here with us.
Andrew, Britt, thank you so much for having me on today. I really appreciate it, and I can't wait to talk animation with you guys.
I'm so excited about this. Andrew very kindly invited me on because I am one of those people that when I think every episode I've been on, and it's been at least 2, I bring up animation and how I think that we need to revise our conversations around it because it's such an important medium. And so I'm just very grateful that I get a chance to talk with both of you about something that I have been pioneering for years and I am very, very passionate about.
It's great to hear.
Not to put the cart before the horse, but Britt and I, about a week from now, we're going to be doing an episode of my main show where we're going to be revising the year 2001, which is notable for Shrek that year, Spirited Away, which might come up in this conversation a little bit.
And Millennium Actress. Do not leave Satoshi Kon out of this.
Come on. Millennium Actress, yes. So we're this is like coming at the perfect time where animation's very much at the forefront of my mind. I know Britt's always thinking about animated movies and things like that.
I watched one today, so yeah.
But I am, of course, very happy to have Britt riding shotgun alongside me. For anyone who's not familiar, this is Britt Reinholz-Hobson. She's 1/3 of the 1001 by 1 podcast trio. She's a dear friend, and I'm so happy that she's here with me.
It'll be fun. Let's be a little chaotic, friends. Let's make it interesting.
There's only chaos with Britt.
Of course.
All right. Well, before we get into Nick, I want to kind of discuss your book and everything that goes into what you did to put those volumes together that are out so far. But before we do that, I want to kind of backtrack a little bit and go to the origin of what got you into animation. So my first question to you is, what was it about animation that captured your attention so much as a child? Like, what led you down this road to animation?
Well, it kind of goes back to something that Roger Ebert used to say about animation, that when he was younger, animated movies looked more realistic to him than live action movies. And I feel that was the case for me too. Animation, it's more expressive than real life. It can break, humanity down to its most basic components, but it can also dig deeper in ways that live action can't. And that's becoming more and more apparent with the wide variety of animated films we have nowadays that cover so many different topics and genres and characters. And you can do so much more, I feel, with animation than you can with live action. And even if you do a movie in live action, that wouldn't have been possible years ago. That's just because, CGI didn't exist. If you wanted to do it now, you'd still end up using animation. And yet, a lot of people still don't really realize that. And animators and visual effects artists are really unsung heroes who are overdue for their flowers, not just at the Academy, but, just in terms of representation in general, too. So that, for me, it all kind of goes back to that Ebert quote and how it always looked more like real to me. And even years later, I still feel that's sometimes the case.
Absolutely. I think there are many, many films that would have benefited if they had been animated. My husband and I quite often go back to a lot of fantasy movies. Like, we would have loved to see a Harry Potter when, Harry Potter was still something we all enjoyed. We would have loved to see that animated because of the magic and everything that goes into it and the character designs. And I think so many films would benefit from having an animated adaptation, but people don't seem to be as interested in that, but I think maybe that's changing. But I really appreciated what you said. I totally 100% agree with that.
To that point,
sorry, you can go, Andrew.
I was just thinking, we so often get animated movies converted to live action, and yet we never really get live action converts to animation, which would be a really interesting flip of the script.
We've had a couple of movies, like a couple things come out. I'm thinking of Netflix has been kind of a champion of animated films and animated series. Some of them are great, some of them are not so great, but I'm still happy to watch them just to make sure we get some traction. But they've done The Witcher. They've done, I believe they had a Lord of the Rings. There's a couple of different ones that have come out post-series, like as a in-between or a prequel, which I think is kind of interesting. So it's something that studios are exploring, I think, but it's still not something that everybody's asking for. Maybe we can change that.
Yeah, and just this year we got an animated Predator movie, and it's easily the third best Predator movie ever made, right after the original and Prey.
Okay, that is what I've heard, and I have not watched it yet. We just haven't gotten around to it, and I'm really, really sad because it's on the list, but I have so many 2001 movies I'm watching. It's hard.
I'm so glad, Nick, that you shouted out Predator, Killer of Killers. By the time this comes out,
that title, Killer of Killers, incredible.
It's a sick title. The animation's phenomenal. It tackles, it just adds to the lore of Predator.
Cool.
It's my number 2 favorite movie of the year so far as the time of this recording. So I had a lot of fun with it. Nick, I kind of looked at your Letterboxd list, not to tip my hand to your, I was stalking a little bit, but I was trying to see where you had Predator, Killer of Killers on your top movies of 2025 so far, because I figured you were probably into it.
Yeah, it's in my top 10 currently, and it's still my number 1 animated movie of the year. I don't know, if it's going to contend for best animated feature contention because, it is a Hulu release, so they might, pass it off as a TV movie. But whether it's Oscar consideration or Emmy consideration, it's got to get praise.
Yeah, and it works out that Dan Trachtenberg, who directed Prey, and he's doing the Predator live action, I like that he did the direction of the animated version, so it feels like one continuous story being put together by a singular voice.
Yeah, and it's actually from an animation studio, and this is their first animated feature. They've worked in a lot of visual effects, they've done theme park rides, but it's their first, attempt at, doing a feature-length animated film, and they really hit the ground running with it.
Amazing. I love that. I now got to go do some research and see what they have coming up next, just from these glowing reviews. So moving on just a little bit, if you had to choose a few animated films that really formulated your love of this incredible art form, what would those be?
Well, at the top, you already mentioned The Nightmare Before Christmas, and I think that was, the first film that really had me asking exactly how is animation made? Because I had seen plenty of hand-drawn films at that point, but something about, the stop motion in Nightmare kind of, got me interested not just in animation, but the very process of how movies were made. And this was all, in a pre-DVD era, so there weren't a ton of ways to figure out exactly how movies were made, and the internet was also in its infancy, so it wasn't as easily looked up. But that was a film that really, formed my fascination with animation. And another film that really, captured me. Of course, there were numerous, Disney Renaissance films that I'm sure we'll talk more about. But beyond those, one that always stood out was The Brave Little Toaster growing up. Yeah, this was before Toy Story, came in and kind of stole that film's thunder. Coincidentally, those two films originally had the same director in John Lasseter, with both being about inanimate objects that come to life. And that always fascinated me, just the idea of inanimate objects coming to life, which again wouldn't have been possible in a live action film. And even if you were to do it now, you would have to do it either with CGI or, maybe with stop motion even. But, animation just kind of showed me that you can bring something to life that, isn't to life in real life and actually give it a personality. that in some ways has more personality than any of the humans.
Brave Little Toaster scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. Still does. Honestly, Worthless, that song hits me to the core. That'll make me cry if I ever listen to it. Sometimes my husband and I'll just like pull up YouTube videos of animated scenes we really enjoy, and Worthless comes up sometimes, and we both are like, whoa, that hits hard. I don't know how to deal with that one.
It's a total banger, and weirdly enough, it never really scared me as a kid, but growing up, I was thought, this should be scary, and I bet that it is, traumatizing children everywhere, but,
Me,
you know,
it was that child. I was the child that was. I think there's a point where the lamp gets struck by lightning, and I was terrified of lightning for years. Like, would have to run from the car whenever it was raining. And I live in Seattle, so it rains a lot. And I was always like, I'm gonna get hit by lightning. And it's all because of the Brave Little Toaster.
for a killer clown attack.
Maybe all of my fears come from the Brave Little Toaster. That could be what it is, because no thank you. I don't want any of that.
Yeah, it's responsible for most childhood trauma.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Yeah, it's funny because the first movie that really scared me is also an animated film, and that would be Fern Gully. I don't know if either of you have seen Fern Gully.
I love Fern Gully.
That
Krista
terrified me.
Oh,
Was it the Toxic Waste song?
Tim Curry.
Yes, Tim Curry's voice in that just gave me nightmares.
Yes, I feel like Tim Curry his voice is responsible for a lot of nightmares. Like
A lot of
with
nightmares.
Pennywise
A lot of great dreams too, though. Like, let's be real. Tim
from the
Curry.
original Pennywise to, and he also made us wary of concierge at hotels. Thanks to Home Alone.
But then he also showed us all that you can be whoever you want to be. Just don't dream it, be it, from the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So I feel like he's a champion amongst men. I love Tim Curry, and I will follow him to the ends of the earth.
He taught us all how to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also how to wear a corset. That's for sure.
All right, Nick, everyone loves a Mount Rushmore question around here, so I'm going to put you on the spot. You got to give me your 4 Mount Rushmore animated films of all time. If you had to pick 4, what are your Mount Rushmore animation movies?
My 4? Well, 1 would definitely be Beauty and the Beast, which is my favorite animated movie ever. And, it was the first also to be nominated for Best Picture, showing that, animation doesn't need to be relegated just to the kids' table. And another one would be the original Toy Story, the first CG animated feature, and is still in many ways, the golden standard that everyone is still trying to replicate years later, including Pixar. And even though 2 and 3, I think, come close to topping it, I feel that you can't quite top the original. Yeah, then I would say I have to have at least one Studio Ghibli movie in there, and even though I'm tempted to say Kiki's Delivery Service, I would go with Spirited Away, which is, let's be honest, Miyazaki's masterpiece. And to think that he almost retired for, the second or third, or who knows how many times he tried.
18th, maybe.
And, he was inspired by the child of a friend who kind of like seemed indifferent. And that inspired him to make this movie, which is just, an entire well of imagination unleashed. And number 4, seeing how we are talking about film, which isn't necessarily regulated just to feature length, I'm going to give a shout out to Wallace and Gromit in the Wrong Trousers, which is about as perfect as an animated film, long form or short form, can possibly get. It's one of the most charismatic villains in all of cinema with Feathers McGraw.
I had a real issue with claymation for a long time. So I came to Wallace and Gromit way later. I think it was probably about 6 years ago that I finally sat down to watch them because my very, very British husband, who is from England, said, no, if you like animation, you must watch Wallace and Gromit. And we started with the one that's on, didn't quite make my Mount Rushmore, but was very close, was Wallace and Gromit, A Close Shave. I just love it so much. They are the most charming little films ever. If I want to be happy, I will put a Wallace and Gromit short on and just be thrilled. My nephew is now 3.5, and I'm like, in a couple years, I can show him Wallace and Gromit. I can't wait. I love that. I love your Mount Rushmore, but I was particularly excited for Wallace and Gromit because I feel like they get left out quite a lot.
Well, a lot of people don't consider it because, it's not an animated feature per se. The train sequence in particular is about as perfect as a sequence gets in feature in any film.
Agreed. 100%.
I'll admit I am very late to the Wallace and Gromit party. I think it's like within the last 2 years I've like watched the
Welcome.
animated films. And Britt, we had talked about this in one of our chats at some point, and you were like, you had recommended checking out the shorts because all I've seen is Vengeance Most Foul and whatever the other animated feature is. But yeah,
The newest one, yeah.
For the whale.
Yes, so I've seen the two I've seen the two feature length films, but I haven't seen any of the shorts. My kids are at the age now 5 and 7 where they actually enjoy watching them, so that's cool. So this might spur me on to go watch the shorts now, I think.
Gotta watch the shorts. I will say the first one, maybe leave the one that goes to the moon till last because I think it's the least successful of the shorts, but you might love it. Who knows? But the other three I think are all top notch, incredible. Please watch them, everybody, because they are so much fun. And they're shorts, so it's not going to take too much of your time. Enjoy animation. Live a little.
Yeah, and I've actually grown up with Wallace and Gromit because even though I'm not British, I had a babysitter when I was young who like brought, the Wrong Trousers VHS, and we watched that. And from that moment on, it was like, okay, what is this, and how can I get more of this? And I feel like
I
I might have
love
been
that.
I feel like I might have been the only kid in my, age group, at least at my school, who like knew who Wallace and Gromit were. But yeah, I've, grown up with Wallace and Gromit, and I always appreciate it when they, return to the zeitgeist, and that they are getting more of a following in the States.
They are now, I think. I went to the Academy Museum a couple of years ago because they had a Studio Ghibli exhibit, which my husband
I
and
was there
I
too.
did you? It was incredible. I sobbed. They had the ending of The Wind Rises going, and Neil and I sat down and watched it, and we both were just bawling. And our very good friend who brought us, who was not a fan, not that he's not a fan, just he hasn't watched them all, and he was like, "Wow, this seems like a very emotional moment for you two," and really, it's just so great. But they had Wallace and Gromit's like actual little claymation there, and we took pictures because I was just over the moon, so excited that there was a bunch of animated like little creatures that people had created, because so much work goes into claymation and stop motion, and I think a lot of people forget about that, like how many seconds it actually takes, or how many takes it is to actually get a second of film. Ugh, I just, it's an art form that we don't talk about enough. It's so
Yeah,
good.
definitely. Yeah, and I believe that you could take pictures everywhere at the Academy Museum except for the studio
Yes. Yeah.
because, right, just sneak something in there. Yeah, I don't want to get kicked out.
Exactly. You're like, I'd really like to look at everything because it's so beautiful. We took a picture in front of my personal favorite Ghibli film is Princess Mononoke. It means a lot to me. I just find myself very gravitating towards it. Plus, people get their heads lopped off. So obviously, as a gorehound, I'm in. We took a picture in front of Sen, and I was over the moon, so happy. Of course, it was during the time of COVID, so we were wearing masks and like you couldn't see us smiling, but I don't care because we were there and it made me happy.
I have a niece and nephew who are younger, and they've seen, My Neighbor Totoro, and they love that film. So I always ask them, so when are you going to show them Princess Mononoke and Grave of the Fireflies?
Oh, perfect. My friend and co-host Adam accidentally showed his daughter Princess Mononoke without knowing what it was. He hadn't watched. He was like, "Oh, you can watch this. It's fine." And after like 5 minutes, she came out. I was like, "I don't want to watch this, Dad." And he finally sat down and went, "Oh no, this is not a kids movie." And I was like, "Absolutely not. You didn't vet this first." He was like, "Spirited Away was fine. She loved it." And I was like, two very different flicks. Very, very
That
different.
strikes me as a very Adam thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. You're fine.
You got it. You're fine.
All right. Well, Nick has set the bar high. Beauty and the Beast, Toy Story, Spirited Away, Wallace and Gromit. Britt, can you top that with a Mount Rushmore? We'll find out.
Okay, so I actually also have Beauty and the Beast on mine, and I'm going to keep it there because I think it is a very important film, and I grew up on Disney films. I was a Disney girl. I had every single princess film out there. And my God, when I watch them, I'm still happy. But following Beauty and the Beast, I would go with they are all Japanese films. I am a huge anime person. That's just how it's gonna go. So I would go with Mamoru Hosada's Summer Wars, which is just, I watch it at least once a year. I think it's one of the most perfect films ever made. I have Princess Mononoke, Miyazaki film, and then I have Satoshi Kon's Perfect Blue.
Yeah, those are all great from three different Japanese masters, too.
Yes, very, very different styles. And I tried to be well-rounded with it. And I was like, damn, I'm trying not to just do Japanese films, but I am the anime nerd of my film podcasting friends. And that's just how it goes.
Well, and
There's a
as
common
someone, I'm Japanese animation is not my forte, and I like dip my toes in a little bit here and there, but I feel like it's very easy from like the Western world to just see Japanese animation as one thing, and it's very much like Britt just gave us three distinct, different. I've seen those movies, and they're very distinct from one another. Whether whether it's Miyazaki or Satoshi Kon, like you're getting vastly different voices, animation styles. There's so much more to Japanese animation. It's just like an ocean of films that I have not discovered yet. So I'm working on
yeah,
it, Britt.
Yeah, I kind of feel when people say that they don't like anime, it's like, no, you just haven't discovered the kind of anime that you like. Because a lot of people go in with this preconceived notion where it's kind of like that old Strong Bad email where he creates a Japanese cartoon, and that kind of gives everyone an idea of, what everyone thought it was with the big, giant, heads and, the big wide. And you all assume it's just like Dragon Ball Z or Pokemon, but there is a much wider variety out there. That's
And
waiting to be discovered by Westerners.
And there's nothing wrong with Dragon Ball Z or
Of course,
Pokemon.
I love
Those
them.
are, oh, yeah, exactly. Those are real gateway things. Like I used to watch Pokemon when I was a kid, but my like gateway into anime, and this is, I think, it's a lot of people's gateway, was Neon Genesis Evangelion. Thank you to my husband when we started dating back in 2011, I want to say at this point, a real long time ago. He had mentioned it, and I was like, it deals with Catholicism, but not in a good way. Perfect. I want to watch it. And it blew my mind, and it truly opened me up to this entire incredible world of adult animation. And I just think there's so much there. And some of it is all fan service, and that's fine. Whatever. Who cares? Like, you're going to get so much out of this genre. Just give it a chance. Everybody, give it a chance. It's really good. There's a lot for you to dive in and try to find. There'll be a movie out there for you, I promise.
Neon Genesis is going to come up every time you and I talk, Britt. It's staring me in the face on my watch list every time I open it on Letterboxd.
You got to be ready for it, man.
I know.
You got to be ready. It's kind of like you're already diving into Twin Peaks right now. Don't do Neon Genesis at the same time.
I was just about to say, as soon as I get through Twin Peaks, I'll do that next, and we'll just go from one crazy to the other.
I don't know. Maybe put something else in there, like rewatch The Good Place before you jump into Neon Genesis. Like, give yourself some time.
Hi, I'm Frankie.
And I'm Scott.
And we are Shoot the Flick. We are a married couple that likes to shoot the about movies.
Whether they're old or new.
Action-packed or full of romance.
Beloved classics or putrid dumpster fires. We got them all.
Every week, we introduce each other to a new flick. We always give our brutally honest opinion.
And we never go to bed angry.
So follow us now on Instagram and Twitter at Shoot the Flick.
And join us every Wednesday on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and more to hear this old married couple shoot the flick.
Wait, did you just call me old?
No, I didn't mean it like that.
Excuse me, sir. I don't know who you think you're talking to.
It's just movies.
Excuse me, sir.
All right, well, now, Nick, I know animation's not all you're into. I mean, you're a movie critic. You watch everything that's out there. So I know your tastes are significantly wider and larger than just animation. So to steal from just the Letterboxd top 4, why don't you give us your top 4 favorite movies right now? You can pull it directly from your Letterboxd. You can just pull any top 4 movies you want. What are your top 4 at the moment?
Yeah, well, you can follow me on Letterboxd, Nick Spake, shameless plug right there. And my favorite movie of all time is E.T. the Extraterrestrial. To me, that's Steven Spielberg's masterpiece. It is childhood incarnate, but it's also about the ending of childhood. And in some respects, I feel that it's, the one that's most personal to him. Yeah. Let's see. Number 2 would be American Beauty, which, has definitely looked somewhat different, looking back, knowing what we know about Kevin Spacey now. But one quote from the book, Best Movie Year Ever, stands out to me where it is, I feel like that film, really, captured the zeitgeist at that time in pre-9/11 world. But I also feel like, it also exposed a lot that we usually didn't notice, like, the pervert who can live, right in your neighborhood, the Nazi living right under your nose. The team, is obsessed, with seeing the world through a screen. It was always there, but we need to look closer to find it. And then My third favorite movie would be, let's see, The Empire Strikes Back. I have to have at least one Star Wars movie in there, and to me, that one is the best. It's the darkest, it's the most emotionally complex, and it's still, pretty much not just set the gold standard for Star Wars, but pretty much every sequel that's followed, not just from the Star Wars franchise, but it feels like every, trilogy or series wants their Empire Strikes Back. Some have come close, but none have quite topped it. But number four, gotta get an animated movie in there. And once again, I'll say Beauty and the Beast, my favorite animated movie, and definitely one of my top four of all time.
I'm so glad you have Beauty and the Beast because I'll be doing, after Britt and I do 2001 in a month, I'll be doing 1991, which, as you had already talked about, Beauty and the Beast becomes the first animated movie in the Best Picture lineup. I'm very excited to see if myself and the two guests I have will we all have Beauty and the Beast? Will anyone give Beauty and the Beast the revised win? I'll be fascinated to see what that
Deserves
conversation.
that. I'd give it. Let's be real.
It's a great year, but it is definitely one of the great animated films for sure. So
that was a very unusual year for the Oscars too, because even though Beauty and the Beast didn't win, it went to Silence of the Lambs, which was still a very unconventional Oscar choice. If they had given it to Bugsy, I'd say that they played it safe, but they definitely, stepped out of their comfort zone that year. And it looked like that might be, a glass ceiling moment for both animation and horror at the Oscars. But even years later, we've had two animated films and really only a handful of horror films. And I can't think of a ton others that have, won, since then either.
And they've definitely overlooked a lot of amazing animated performances and horror performances. They just point blank refuse to give anybody a nomination in either of those, which is a point of contention for me.
That's why you're here, Britt.
Yes, I know. I just have to let you know, because I had a very visceral response to E.T. Andrew knows this. I'm terrified of E.T. as well. It is I still, to this day, get shivers thinking about E.T. So that just made me laugh, because I was like, oh, all of your favorite films are the films that scarred me emotionally as a child.
What scarred others charmed me. What can I say?
I love it. As a extreme horror person, I think it's really funny that the movies that really get to me are The Brave Little Toaster and E.T. because I can watch a lot of stuff, but don't put those on around me, apparently.
I'm a huge E.T. lover as well, and I had not realized until the last 18 months how many people in my movie podcast world have been severely scarred and traumatized by E.T. Britt, you are not alone. There are multiple.
I know, because Hannah hates it too.
Yep, and Sarah Shea, who's a friend and past guest of the show. There are multiple.
Of course, I love Sarah, and even more now.
Yeah, E.T. has scarred many a podcaster, apparently.
It's a rite of passage.
All right, Britt.
It's kind of the theme of the film, too.
For sure.
Yes.
I mean, the other one that really gets to me is AI, Artificial Intelligence, also by Spielberg. So Spielberg just really hits my soul in a way that's uncomfortable and makes me consider my mortality, I guess. But moving on from my mortality. So I read the first volume and I thought it was amazing. I really, really enjoyed it. I learned so much, and I'm really excited to read the next two, especially once the third one comes out. And I'm just curious, what made you decide to tackle the subject of animation and its relationship to award shows?
Well, animation and award shows have always been two major passions of mine, so it just kind of made sense to combine them together. And when they created the Best Animated Feature category, that was one category that I always, followed very closely, especially since, it was created, at an age where, I wasn't quite seeing, a lot of the R-rated films that were getting nominated for Best Picture, but I could have, at the very least, usually see all the Best Animated Feature nominees. So, and it was around the time that Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse came out that I said, oh, this is a great film, but it's not going to get nominated for Best Picture. If it gets nominated for Best Animated Feature, it can definitely win there, but it's not going to get nominated for Best Picture. And it was around that time that I thought, might be interested to make a book, that might dive into, why animation gets the short end of the stick. And at first I considered just doing it about the Oscars, but then I figured, well, I could explore, other award shows too. I could also get into the Emmys. I could also get into the Annies, which is specifically for animation. And I could also, share tidbits about the Golden Globes, BAFTA, and all the others that, are on the awards trail as well. Which is why, the book is called Animation at Award Shows and not Animation at the Oscars. Especially since I didn't want to lead to any, copyright battles with the Oscars because,
I think that's fair.
Yeah, the
Go for
book blew me away. I mean,
Yeah.
like, it was nice because it was, if you don't have like a steeped knowledge of animation, I didn't feel like I was going into it at a disadvantage by not
No.
having like this huge breadth of knowledge. Like, I thought you guided everyone into the book really well. You had a ton of knowledge, a ton of different sources you were working on. And the question that came to mind as I was reading it, because I haven't talked to that many authors over my lifetime, and so I'm curious how much time and work went into the research aspect of it, because I can only imagine how much you had to dig into interviewing people, reading up on publications, all these different things that you had to do. Why don't you explain to somebody who's not familiar with the process of writing a book what you put into the research before that book ever touches a shelf?
Well, it started right after Spider-Verse came out. So like early 2009, I started, just putting my ideas to paper. And, I ultimately finished my, draft that I turned into my publisher in early 2024. So it took, nearly like 5 or 6 years to do it. And, when I started, I honestly didn't think it would take that long because animation and award shows, animation doesn't get a lot of respect there. So obviously, there's only going to be so much to talk about, but as I expanded my research, it ended up being much longer than I thought, and I figured, I shouldn't just, contain this to one book. I should try to, get as much information in there as I can. And it only got more, ambitious when I started interviewing people, because at first I figured, okay, maybe I can get a few animation historians to talk to me, maybe a couple animators, but I'm not going to get, a ton who are very interested. And I figured, well, it might be good if I could, talk to everyone who's living who might have a hand in some of these, films. And to my surprise, a lot of them said yes. Like before I knew, I was all like, I think I was awestruck with a lot of these, but the biggest was probably when, I got a hold of Steven Schwartz's people. And they said, yeah, he'd be interested in talking, but I see that you haven't talked to Alan Menken. Would you want to talk to him too? I'm like, yes, of course. And, it was really serendipitous because they were both working on, the sequel to Enchanted at the time. So I was able to talk to them at the same time. And I was all like, okay, what are these guys doing talking to me? I'm grateful at all, but, I'm just a guy who's writing a book who may or might not get published. They definitely have better things that they could be doing with their time, and yet they're talking to me. And that was the moment where I was all like, okay, maybe, this will actually become something down the line. And about 200 interviews later, it did.
That also had me awestruck because I am a musical theater girl and I read those names and went, oh my God, my heroes. So incredible. I think it's amazing. And to go back to the way that the book was written, I agree. I'm a person who does have some knowledge of animation, but I learned so much in the book that I read. And I also felt like it was really easy to digest and it was super attainable. None of it felt like, I didn't ever feel overwhelmed. It didn't feel like an academic book, even though it is a history of something, but it was really easy to read and such a fun read too. I read it so much quicker than I anticipated and went, wait, no, I want more. And thankfully there is more. I can just go read the next 2 volumes.
That's what made me happy. I'm a notoriously bad reader in terms of I'm always doing so many other things that reading is just not something that I find myself forcing myself to do. When I get into reading, I enjoy it. The beautiful thing about this book, Nick, I only read volume 1 so far. The nice thing about it was after a long day of work, a long day of like doing other things, dealing with kids, it was the perfect thing to be my come down for like an hour when I was laying in bed. Like the night was kind of winding down. I could read a couple of chapters. Like Britt said, I felt like I was learning things, but not in a way where I was like, okay, I have to like study what's happening. Like
Yes.
you just nicely dropped in all of these little nuggets of factual information. And I follow the award shows pretty closely, and yet I was learning a great deal about some of the backstory and the history of the awards. It was really revelatory to me. So I have to commend you for the work that you put in. The idea you interviewed 200 people is crazy. Like the amount of stuff that you have to condense into the volume is unbelievable.
Yeah. And well done.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate that. And you wouldn't believe how many times I had to like just rewrite everything with every interview I did because I was all like, well, I should go back and work that in somehow. Or, "Oh, well, that doesn't sound quite right based on what he told me, so let's revise that." And, I just never imagined that this would end up being 3 volumes. And I also never imagined that anyone would be interested in publishing potentially 3 volumes. Fortunately, my publisher, Bear Manor Peter, they kind of specialize in like doing, these kinds of books that are, they're based on a lot on pop culture, and they publish stuff in volumes. Like one guy I know just had a Batman book published to them, and it ended up being 5 volumes. It's all about Batman, the animated series, and interviews from there. So that was kind of a nice.
Fascinating. That's so great that you were able to find a publisher that really championed your idea and believed in what you had to say, because I think it's really important history, especially for anybody that is interested in film. We should be discussing the history of animation. It is integral. It is really, really important. And I mean, even if you look at work like Satoshi Kon's work, it's so influential in live action and people choose to ignore that. I mean, I remember Andrew was doing a podcast about Black Swan, and I was like, well, you better be watching Perfect Blue. And I basically like forced him to do it, because I was like, if you're going to be talking about this film, you have to watch the Perfect Blue beforehand. I just really appreciate the fact that it's so readily available and accessible for people. Like, if you're a film person, read it. It's super fun and really interesting.
Yeah, and I feel like it would win over some people who aren't like we.
Agreed.
We have friends and we have people we podcast with who animation's not their thing. And this is a great book to kind of get people into animation as well. Like, I feel like your exuberance for animation bleeds through the pages in a way that makes somebody who's reading it want to absorb more animated movies. Like, I found myself wanting to watch more animated stuff after reading it, because I could sense your joy and your passion for animation in the book. It was really incredible.
Well, thank you. And with the first chapter alone, I really wanted to establish a tone, detailing why I'm writing this book, why animation matters, and why, if you think that animation, isn't as important or not for you, that throughout this book you might find that it is.
And that actually is a great lead into my next question, which why do you think it is that animated films are always looked at as less than compared to live action films in the award season?
Well, I think for one thing, it's because it's mainly actors who are voting. They have the biggest branch. And unless actors can, see themselves on the screen, they don't necessarily take it as seriously. Even though we are getting more and more actors who are doing voiceover, sometimes they're in it because they think it'll be, an easier paycheck, even though it's harder. Although, let's be honest, there are some people who are basically just paid to play themselves. When Chris Rock, asked, he's basically just being paid to be Chris Rock. It's an easy gig for them. And some people are doing it because they figure, well, it'll be something, that I can have my kids do. And, but some people that do it do find that it is much harder, and they walk away with more an appreciation. And I feel like, one thing I think that would be good is that at the SAG Awards, technically animation casts, are eligible in like ensemble, but they could also have, a category there specifically for, best voiceover performance. I mean, they're on Netflix now. They can make time for it. And if actors had more of an incentive to get an award for their work, I feel like they would take it more seriously. And they're probably not going to introduce anything like that at the Academy anytime soon, because I guess there are probably a lot of logistics to consider, like would it be a gender neutral award? Would you have two separate awards? Would the animation branch vote on it? Would the actors branch voice on it? And seeing how they're getting, two new categories in, same with, casting and stunts.
Thank God.
Yeah, and thank God, but they're probably not going to add any more anytime soon. They're probably not going to get it, but also because a lot of people just don't understand how animation is made. Like, I talked to directors of Beauty and the Beast, and, one of them said that the question they get the most is, what does an animation director do? And he says, the same thing that a live action director does. We're working in different mediums, but we basically have the same jobs. So more people need to be education about animation. And I also think that's just because, from a young age, a lot of us are taught that, animation is for kids. And that's really the mentality that a lot of people have grown up on. But, more and more people are, still watching animation as adults. Like people who grew up with anime like Toonami, people who have grown up with brands like Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network still kind of go back and revisit that. And, I do feel like that as we get more millennials in the academy, and the next generation, they'll be more open to recognizing animation, because for a lot of them it isn't really kid stuff. It's still kind of their identity. But the millennials are the generation that have never grown up, which for some might get crap for, but really I'd say they're more enlightened than the boomers.
I would say that we as a millennial, we just know what we like. Okay? We have been through the world on fire many, many, many times, and we have to just hold on to the things that make us happy. And for me, it's animation. I kind of want to go back to something that you said, and I found it really interesting. You were discussing new categories for animated actors who work in voiceover. So, are you a champion? Do you think that there should be separate categories for actors who are doing voice work, or do you think that they should be included in the regular acting categories? I have an opinion about this, but I'm really interested to just hear your thoughts behind that.
It'd be great to see that, but I can see both sides of the argument. On one hand, I would have given the Best Supporting Actor Oscar to Gollum for his work in Lord of the Rings: The
100.
Two Towers. But the big question there is that, even though he was responsible for the voice and also a lot of the facial movements, the performance wouldn't have been possible without, the folks at a digital. And the question is, do you also give them? And the same goes for, a more traditionally animated film. Like when Robin Williams was being championed, as the Best Supporting Actor contender, do you also give an Oscar to Eric Goldberg, who did, the character animation for the genie? Because, again, otherwise it would be a disembodied voice. On the other hand, you look at someone like Demi Moore in The Substance, where she gave a phenomenal performance, but it also wouldn't have been possible without makeup. You take that away, and a part of the performance is lost, and something similar could be said about animation. How, in a way, there's digital makeup, there's animation, which is its own form of makeup. So, I'd be down for definitely recognizing more, performers in, animation by also nominating them alongside live action. And to an extent, we see that in some places, like at the Emmys, a voiceover performance isn't necessarily just, for animation there. We see plenty of people who do like traditional voiceovers, like Julie Andrews for British and Contends there. So that's one place where they do kind of coexist, but you don't really see a lot of, live action performers nominated alongside animated performances. And I'd be down for that, although I wouldn't say no to a category of its own for sure, because that would bring more recognition. And it would open the door for a lot of people who really wouldn't be in the Oscar conversation, like Amy Poehler, to get recognized.
Totally, totally. I'm one of those people where I have a really hard time with the idea of creating a separate category because I think voice acting is so difficult. People who haven't done it just don't understand how hard it is to do voice work and also don't even consider like certain like the people do mocap and they don't understand that these actors are actually physically doing the work and then they're painting over their movements. So it's like there's a lot that goes into it and I worry if we had a separate category, how many actors would try to do voice work because they would think it's an easier way to get an award. But I also think that we aren't recognizing these actors that are doing incredible work in the animation sphere. So maybe they do deserve their own award. I think it's a really difficult it's a difficult question without really a good response. Like your response was obviously fantastic, but I don't know what needs to change in order for people to truly take voice acting seriously. I really don't. And I studied theater. I'm an actor and I've done voiceover work and it's hard. It is nowhere near the same. And I just commend everybody that does it as a profession. It is very, very hard.
It's interesting, Nick, that you said that. I'm very much pro. I think voice acting should be just considered in the acting categories. However, I had never considered the idea, like the Robin Williams example is tremendous because
Yeah,
I
agreed.
absolutely think Robin Williams should have been in consideration for that performance. But to your point, what you're seeing the artist draw adds so much life and body to
Yeah.
the voice that I can see there's that kind of a conundrum with how do you give the award to just Robin Williams because he's not the only component of that. So it may make more sense to segment them off. It's kind of a catch to like you can't really win either way, which leads me to my next question, which is another thing that kind of comes up all the time where I sometimes hear people say they're like, animated movies should just be happy because they've got their own category and, the Pixar movie can win Best Animated Feature. It doesn't need to be in the Best Picture conversation. That's for real movies. That type of, you hear that every now and then online and from people. Do you think it's been helpful or more of a hindrance that the Oscars specifically now have a Best Animated Feature? Like, do you think it's it's in some way counterintuitive to actually allowing animation to get into that Best Picture category because they're sort of compartmentalized. Where do you stand on just the idea of the Oscars having their own animated feature section?
Well, I asked that same question to a lot of the people that I interviewed when I wrote my book, and a lot of them said the same thing, that when it was first created, they were excited but apprehensive because they thought that it might mean that animation would never get recognized in the Best Picture category again. But they ultimately contended that it was a good thing because it would open the door for more animation to be recognized. And I do agree with that because now, under the current rules, we can have anywhere between 3 to 5 animated films nominated per year, and that's guaranteed, rather than just having one animated film that could potentially break into Best Picture and then won't. And, with Parasite, it's shown that, that's kind of, the equivalent, the best international film to animation, because much like animation, international films isn't limited to like one genre, even though some people just kind of think of international films that it has subtitles and it's a genre. No, it can be a comedy, it can be a drama, it can be an action film, it can be a wide variety of things. And Parasite proved that that a foreign language film could win both Best Picture as well as Best Director and international film to go with it. Parasite, did have a benefit of being, of having this, great ensemble piece that also won at the SAG Awards. I feel that's what really carried it over. So animation is still looking, for its Parasite that can also get the, actors on board. Yeah, we need to see that. But I do think that in the long run, it is good that they did introduce the Best Animated Feature category because, look at this year. Like, we would have seen Wild Robots still nominated in a few categories. We would have seen Flow in International, but, there also would have been no place for Inside Out 2, which was, the biggest animated film up until that point. There was Memoir of a Snail, which is another great film that would have gone completely overlooked at the Best Animated Feature category. And, there's always such great variety in the Best Animated Feature category where it's not necessarily just the big money makers. They usually go to their way to find, films that wouldn't be on your radar. I mean, look at something like The Secret of Kells, like from Cartoon Saloon. When that came out, everyone was like, what is this movie? How come I've never heard of it until it got the Oscar nomination? And even then, Cartoon Saloon, they had made the movie and had gotten great reviews, but it hadn't, been a huge box office success and it cost a lot. So they were like kind of considering, what their, next, thing is going to be. And then while they were having that discussion, someone in the other room at the office screamed, "Oh, we got nominated for an Oscar!" So that, brought a lot more attention to, that studio and paved the way for it to make even more. So I do think that, the Best Animated Feature category is important. And even though, it might prevent some people from nominating a film there, it doesn't outright prevent it. Because if you really think about it, before the category was created, Beauty and the Beast was the only nominee. And if they weren't going to nominate Aladdin, Lion King, Toy Story after that, it was probably clear that it wasn't going to happen anytime soon. But, you know, several years after they did create the category, we got Up in, we got Toy Story 3 in. So technically, we've seen more animated films nominated since its creation, since before. We still haven't seen it, in a long time, and it's long overdue to, bring it
Yeah.
back in. But, I do think that in the long run, it is good that they have that other category. But we do need to see a film finally win Best Picture.
Absolutely.
It's funny because in your book, the Parasite comparison was a tremendous kind of light bulb moment for me where I'm like, because I'm very much of the mindset it feels like animation's never going to have its big Best Picture breakthrough, unfortunately. But I do feel like Parasite was such a game changer for everything, and it feels like even last year Flow being in the international feature was just like another step in the right direction. It feels like we're on the precipice of having that moment, and Parasite does feel like a precursor for what could follow at some point in animation sooner than later.
And I'm also curious, Flow, it kind of came up at the last second. It had gotten a lot of buzz at Cannes, but it didn't really enter the conversation as a very serious Oscar contender until the 11th hour. And that got it into international film along with animated. I'm just curious that if it had gotten more buzz and, and had more time to campaign, could it have made, the Oscar top 10? Because, we've also seen in recent years that 2 international films can get into Best Picture with Amelia Perez and I'm Still Here. That wouldn't have happened, a few years ago before they started to expand to more international voters. So if we'd see 2 international films in there, maybe, they will find room for an animated film, or maybe even 2 animated films, but I guess let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Justice for Flo. It should have been in that top 10. Sorry, I'm such a Flo fan with every fiber of my being. So that makes me happy because I totally agree. It kind of came up underneath and everyone, I was pretty positive the Wild Robot would have it, but I was like, Flo forever. So speaking of like how, Flo came up out of nowhere and was, managed to take Best Animated Feature. Do you think that we are in a better place in 2025 for animated films being treated with more industry respect than we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago? Where do you think we stand in the industry?
Well, 30 years ago, the two big animated films released that year were Toy Story and Pocahontas. And I guess if you were to, have a Best Animated Feature category that year, the third film probably would have been a Goofy movie, which some people would argue was the best of the lot, but probably wouldn't have won then. But if that had been the
Great film.
case, all three films would have been from under the Disney umbrella, which was also a big, issue for why they waited so long to have a category for animation. The argument was always that Disney will just get them all. Outside of, the occasional Don Bluth or Ralph Bakshi, there really weren't a ton of other, studios or animators that were having a successful string of animated films, or really even a string of animated films. But then, fast forward to 2005, 20 years ago, we had, Corpse Bride, we had Howl's Moving Castle, we had Wallace and Gromit. Three great films, and none of them were from Disney. And fast forward another, 10 years, Inside Out 2 won the Oscar that year, but you also had films like, Boy in the World, you had Anomalisa, you had even great films that didn't get nominated for an animated feature like the Peanuts movie. And fast forward now, 2025, we're still waiting for, more animated films to come out, see some of the film festival films to, come out. But it's safe to say that there's more variety now, and it's not just Disney anymore. So I do think that animation itself is in a much better place, much more varied place. We could still do a lot more in terms of representation and, fairly compensating animators and giving them the recognition they deserve. But I do think that we are in a better place than we were in even 10, 15, 20, or 30 years ago.
Yeah. That's all that was a well of information. And I just was so in awe of what you were saying. Great. Good job. I'm going to give you a clap for that one because you said it beautifully.
It is amazing the variety over the last really 5 to 7 years. It just feels like, and it's not necessarily that animation has increased variety as opposed to just the awareness of the general movie populace to see what's out there. I think of Flea from 2021, which was an animated film that was up for international feature, I believe, as well. And that was a movie where I was like, oh, okay, animation is on the right track in terms of attacking real mature adult stories and sort of breaking through these Academy voters. And I also think it helps that the Academy body is continually getting more and more globalized, which I think is going to be ultimately a benefit to animated films long term. I'm going to put you on the spot though, Nick, right now. At the risk of breaking Britt's heart, we've talked about all the animated movies in last year's Oscars lineup. So, Nick, if you were a voter last year, would you have voted for Flea as the best animated film, or did you prefer one of the other four that were in that category?
Now, you said Flea. Do you mean Flo?
No, yes. I mean Flo last year, yes. I get my Flo and my Flea mixed up.
You know what? That's fair. They have two of the same letters.
It would have been very tempting to go with Flo. My personal favorite that year, not just, for animated feature, but overall, was The Wild Robot. And I was really ready for Chris Sanders to get his flowers, because he is long overdue. We do have a Wild Robot sequel coming out, so you never know. He's not retired yet. I do think that he really is overdue for at least an honorary Oscar, because we don't see enough of those given out this year. But hey, at least we got Tom Cruise in there. But last year was, one of the best years for animation in this lineup, because we also had Memoir of a Snail, which I mentioned, which, was also one of my favorite films. And even some films that didn't get nominated, like Chicken for Linda is a very lovely film that didn't get nominated in a less competitive year could have. And I'll also give a shout out to The Day the Earth Blew Up, a Looney Tunes movie, which, was always going to be hard because it did get the most minor of releases, and it wouldn't even get a wider release until the following year. But, the fact that movie, was available to see it all, I guess, is a miracle. But but Wild Robot was my favorite, and just a great year for animation overall. And it was actually I, like you, was predicting Wild Robot to win, but when Flo won, I was all like, I got to revise the ending of my book right now for sure because, actually, what's the way we were doing it? I published the first volume, just, as, the Oscars were going, because I told my publisher, okay, so there are a couple of things in my book that I might want to change at the last minute with volume one because I originally had a passage saying that Walt Disney won the most Oscars in one night, and that's never been topped by anyone. I was like, well, Sean Baker might do it this year, so just let me wait and see. And then I got back and said, okay, so Sean Baker did tie, so let's change that real quick. Then I was looking through volumes 2 and 3 for anything else that I might want to consider, any stats that changed. And I'm like, okay, so I have this epilogue that will be in volume 3, and it basically ends on the boy and the Huron. And then I was like, well, now I need to, I really got to talk about Flo and what that means, because that could really bring a siege thing. So I definitely am happy for Flo because, that is, just an unprecedented win for animation because even though some might argue that, Boy and the Heron was the first, indie film to win in that category, it did, have the biggest budget apparently as Studio Ghibli has ever had. And even though distributor B Kids, is an indie, studio, and they definitely aren't operating with the same resources that Disney or DreamWorks have. It does just feel weird calling a Studio Ghibli film an independent animated film.
Yeah.
Flo is as independent as it gets, starting from a man who basically, it's only his second feature, and his first feature he literally just made on his own, and he was a self-taught animator, and also from and not just from, a team that no one has heard of, but also from Latvia, a country that had never been represented at, the Academy before. And for a lot of people might not have heard of Latvia or seen it at least as competitive for, filmmaking until right now. So yeah, it is, a great underdog story for a great film.
As much as I love the Wild Robot, I'm sorry, Britt, that it's 2-1 Wild Robot over
It's okay.
Flo, but
it's fine. Everybody can have their own opinions and they can be wrong, but it's okay. I still respect you both. It's fine.
I want the Oscars, so I think
it's true.
I think it deserved it as much as I personally was more moved by Wild Robot. I think that the idea that you can make that on open source technology and have it be what it was is unbelievable.
It makes animation feel attainable for people who might not have the resources of a big studio. And I think that's what's so incredible about it. It kind of because Gintz, I can't say his last name, so I'm not going to. His next film, which will have voice actors in it, he's going to use Blender again. He's going to use an open source software. And I think it's very, very important for people who want to do this but don't have the luxury of having backing from a studio or having a huge entire team that can spend an entire year doing 4 seconds of in a movie. And yes, I'm talking about Studio Ghibli and The Wind Rises, which is one of my favorite movies in the entire world. And it has an incredible scene that took it's a 4-second scene that took a year to hand animate. But not everybody has those access to that. But Flo shows that you can do this, even if you don't have the resources of a bigger studio. And that's why I think it's so important. Wild Robot's real pretty to look at. I will say that. It is beautiful to look at. But I just found myself so emotionally connected to Flo, and man, A Cat in Peril will always get me every single time.
There's no doubt. There's no impact of that movie on the movie industry is significantly larger than Wild Robot. What it's going to do for future animators is phenomenal.
And the most significant of all, no actors. That was the one thing I was all, are they really going to, an Academy still mainly dominated by actors going to award a film with no actors? Because if you look at the best animated short category, there are plenty of, winners there where, they didn't have any voice actors, but a lot of them are basically dialogue-free films. But we had never seen that in the best animated feature category. We had seen films like The Red Turtle, but that couldn't win. But Flo proved that, they could do it. And it could be, the next step, as Guillermo del Toro puts it.
Yes. And I hope it is. I appreciate that because I love Flo. I love Flo. I love cats. My husband and I were watching it, and he had no idea what he was getting into. And he turned to me at one point with his fist clenched, and he was like, "Is this cat going to be in peril the entire time?" And I said, "Yes, this cat will be." He was like, "I don't know if I can handle this movie." He did. We watched it. We both sobbed multiple times.
And now it's getting a Criterion release too, right?
Yeah, I pre-ordered it.
Yeah.
It will be
That's
in my
awesome.
house because I love it so much.
And Away, his original film, is also going to be on there too, which is also
Yes,
definitely worth checking out if you haven't seen it.
totally agree. So, speaking of Best Picture at the Academies, if you had to build a case for a single animated film that you think is deserving of the win of Best Picture at the Academy Awards, what would it be and why?
Yeah. You might think I'd say Beauty and the Beast because that is my favorite, and it was nominated for Best Picture, but I would go back even further and say, the first hand-drawn, fully cel-animated film from the US, and that would be Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Yeah.
Not just because it was the first film, because it's so well done for, a first film, not just on a technical level, but also on a storytelling value. And a film like that couldn't be made today because a lot of the hand-drawn animation masters aren't with us anymore, and a lot of them haven't been trained properly. Even those who are still working in hand-drawn animation, a lot of them still do it on the computer and just couldn't do that like they did back then. And it really was the best film of that year. I mean, The Life of Emile Zola, it's a fine film and all, but nobody talks about it years later. And, yeah, dude, I would definitely say Snow White. It's great that Walt Disney got, his honorary Oscars with his, 7, Academy Awards. And, Shirley Temple told him, "Ooh, isn't it bright and shiny?" Which is where I got the title from the book, too. So it made definitely for a great Oscar moment, but it definitely deserved to take Best Picture as well. And they probably figured out at the time that, maybe it was just too unique, nominate it for Best Picture, but that was also just a sign that it really was the Best Picture of that year.
I'm going to throw up a social media poll and ask people if they prefer Snow White or Life of Emile Zola.
Oh,
Just so we can see animation get a big win, at least on
thank
social
God.
media.
Yep.
Well, be sure to specify whether or not it's, the good Snow White or the bad Snow White.
Put the year.
Yeah.
Well, up the year.
Nick, I was looking your letterbox list for 2025 movies, and I see that you have Snow White from this year about as low as I do, so that was nice to see.
It's my second lowest. My least favorite this year is still The Electric State. And yeah, I don't even know if I hated Snow White as much as some people, but yeah, the more I think about it, it is a pretty bad.
Haven't watched it and probably won't, to be perfectly honest. I think I'm good.
You've got better things to do, Britt.
Exactly. I've got a lot of anime to catch up on, so I'd rather just watch that.
All right.
Unless you're going to watch all the rest of them this year.
Definitely not. My time is there's just no way. I'm not going to watch movies that I probably won't enjoy. I try real hard not to.
That's what I'm here for.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Andrew will watch them all, probably 5 times each, just to make sure that he has a good opinion.
That's right. All right. Well, let's wrap this up with a little surprise thing I haven't prepared either of you for. So
Thanks.
You're welcome. I know Britt loves a surprise.
Love it.
Okay, so Nick, I don't know how familiar you are with this concept, but it's something that's like blowing up all over social media right now, and that's blind ranking. Are you familiar with the concept of a blind ranking?
Yes, I have a general idea, but if you want to explain it for everyone who's listening and, just bring me up to speed as well in case I'm misinterpreting.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I have 5 animated films in front of me on a piece of paper here, and I'm going to ask you both to play along with this game, and I'm going to read off the first movie, and you're going to rank it 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, 1 being the best, 5 being the worst, having no clue what's going to be coming next. And we'll see how your 2 lists end up at the end of this. Does that make sense, Britt?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, so you've got 5 spots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1 being the best. And I'm going to start things off nice and easy for you with 20.
Easy 5.
Okay.
I'd say 3. I'm a Frozen defender all the way, but I do think that we might be able to do better.
Okay.
I am not a Frozen defender. I actually have very strong opinions about Frozen, and it is one of my least favorite Disney movies ever. My husband and I went to go see it. We were so excited. I was like over the moon excited to see it because it was about sisters, and then it wasn't really about sisters. And that's a big issue for me because I'm very close with my sisters. So
I
Frozen.
actually saw it with my sister. We both connected over it, but I do have
Good,
one
I'm
question.
glad.
You say it's one of your least favorite Disney movies. Have you seen Chicken Little?
I have. And I guess I would prefer to watch Frozen over Chicken Little because damn, it's got some good songs, but it's still going to be number 5 on this.
Well-
If Chicken Little comes up, screw you, Andrew.
We'll find out. All right, so Nick's playing it safe. He's got it right in the middle at 3. Britt's bottoming out on Frozen.
Yep.
All right, let's go to 2018 now. Let's jump into a movie we've already talked about. That's Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Okay, very tempting to go with 1, but I am going to go with number 2.
Same.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to go with 2 just in case, but that's a good flick. Wow, I couldn't say flick there. That is a good flick. You can keep it in. I don't care.
Oh, I'm keeping it in for sure.
Yeah,
there's no editing happening on this pod.
And I'm not even drinking beer this time. I'm drinking water, so I don't know what's going on.
Do you both prefer Into the Spider-Verse over Across the Spider-Verse?
Mm-hmm.
I actually like Across the Spider-Verse a little more.
Okay.
Although we are going to have to wait and see how well Beyond the Spider-Verse wraps everything up, and we can look at it in one big package.
I prefer the first one because it does feel very much like a solo movie. Like you can watch it without having to watch the second one. With the second one, I thought it was an incredible spectacle. But then the fact that we have to wait for the last one to finish it out when we didn't for the first movie really annoyed me. But it was cool to look at. And I like all the Spider-Men.
Yeah,
and Spider-Women.
Remember that my favorite Star Wars movie is Empire Strikes Back.
That's also mine, though.
And the Spider-Verse is very much the empire of that movie. And it also is just visual nirvana.
Oh, yeah. It's incredible.
The second one just took it to at a whole new level. Also, I just think it's a little more thematically interesting than the first one, too.
Fair. Totally fair.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm torn. I could pick either one depending on the day. I do love the soundtrack more on the first one, which usually tips the scale a little bit for me, but I have a good time with both. Okay, so Nick's got 1, 4, and 5 open. Britt, you've got 1, 3, and 4 open.
Yes.
We're going to go to 2001 now. So we're going to go back a little bit earlier. Don't worry, Britt. It's not the one you're thinking of. We're going to talk about Shrek right now. So where would you put Shrek on your list?
Yeah, it's number 1.
Number 1 for Nick.
I have a feeling we're not going to top it.
Okay.
That's amazing. I think Shrek is really fun. I did recently revisit it, and I really would love to see a remastered version where they redid some of the animation, because some of it does look pretty rough now. In my opinion, looks kind of rough. I'm specifically thinking of like the grass. For some reason, it really bothered me. But like Shrek was awesome. I like Shrek a lot more than Frozen. Like it is leaps and bounds better than Frozen in my opinion. But it's still 4.
Even though there have been a lot more technological advances since Shrek came out, I do find it a lot more visually interesting than a lot of the CG animation that we are getting years later. Because I do think that even with those parts like the grass, it does give them a little bit more of a rough edge and personality, which I do think fits the tone of the movie.
Fair, totally.
All right, Nick's boxed himself in a little bit. He's got 4 and 5 open, so we'll see what comes up. Britt, you've got 1 and 3 open, so you still left yourself a little bit of grace. The next movie we're going to talk about, I don't have it here in front of me, but it's going to be 2010 Toy Story 3. Okay,
yeah, well, since I've been boxed into a corner, I'm going to have to say 4. If I could do a time machine, I would probably reverse it, but since I can't, I'm going to have to say number 4 just because that's where I am. But let the record show, I would probably revise these if I could, but that's just the cruelty of the game.
I'm actually pretty happy with where everything is now, but I'm really scared about the last film because it has to be my number 1. But I would put Toy Story 3 genuinely at 3. It's my favorite of all of the Toy Story, and I have gone on record as I'm not a big Toy Story fan. Like, it's just not my jam. Sid scared me too much, I guess, when I was a kid. But I do really like Toy Story 3, and I think the ending hit so hard. Met my husband's best friend for the first time, and then we watched Toy Story 3, and I was just sobbing in the corner, and I was like, this is so embarrassing. Oh my God, I've never met any of these people in my life. I'm just like, he's giving away his toys. So yeah, it very emotionally connected with me, apparently.
All right, so Britt, you've only got spot 1 available, and Nick only has spot 5, so you're flip-flopped. So here is the final movie that's going to land in that spot for you. It is 2024. It is the winner of the Oscar for Best Animated Feature. It's Flow. That worked out so well for you, Britt.
Yeah, genuinely, this is probably how I would have it ranked. I might switch Spider-Verse and Flow. I don't know. It depends on the day, but that's 100% number 1 for me. I was so worried it was going to be something like I don't know. The brave little toaster. No, that probably would have been one too. Let's be real. It's great.
All right, well, let me run them down real quick. Let me know how happy you are with your list. So, Britt, I've got you at Flow, Into the Spider-Verse, Toy Story 3, Shrek, and Frozen. Nick, you've got Shrek at the top, Into the Spider-Verse, Frozen, Toy Story 3, and Flow. How you feeling with your blind rankings?
I could definitely have done it better, but yeah, I would still have Shrek at number one.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
I love it.
I feel good about mine. Mine's great. I'm happy with it.
I was wondering how much chaos it was going to cause for you, Britt, because you had no preparation and you told me you weren't at all familiar with blind rankings. So
no.
I think
God, you did ask me about that.
I did, remember?
Yes.
Yeah.
No. Mm-mm.
Okay. Well, you passed the test. All right.
Hair flip. I'm so happy.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up now, but I appreciate having you both on. Nick, it was really a pleasure getting to sit down and talk with you about this.
Absolutely.
Please do us a favor right now. For everyone that's listening, plug everything you got out there, your book, where people can find it, where they can find you on the socials, your Letterboxd account. Let us know everything about all of the stuff you have out there.
Well, thank you, Britt and Andrew, so much for having me on. This has been a great conversation, and thank you so much for your kind words about my book. And if you want to learn more about my book, you can visit cartooncontender.com. And if you are interested in buying Bright and Shiny Volume 1 and 2, which are available now, you can find them on Amazon.com, on BarnesandNoble.com, and through my publisher, BaronManorMedia.com. And if you want to follow me, I'm on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it as Nick Spake. You can find me on Letterboxd as Nick Spake. You can find me on Instagram at Cartoon Contender. And I'm also on, let's see, did I say Blue Sky already? And Threads, because Threads is a thing too. Yeah, I'm on there.
Barely.
And yeah. And of course, Facebook. And hey, we're getting a Social Network sequel. So yeah, we're.
True.
Yes,
I
we
did
are.
see that.
We are indeed getting one.
Yeah, and stay tuned for Bright and Shiny Volume 3 coming eventually. It's written, it just needs to be properly formatted and properly edited, especially since, Flow was kind of a last-minute addition there.
And Nick, I'll make sure to have all your socials in the description to this. I'll have the links to all your websites, all the book links on Amazon, all that good stuff. So definitely please check it out. Nick was kind enough. He was kind enough to let Britt and I read the book, and Volume 1 was incredible. I can't wait to dig into Volume 2 as well.
Same.
All right, Britt.
And to pre-order book 3, like literally, yes. As soon as that drops, I'll be pre-ordering it because I'm really, really enjoyed the first book so much.
All right, Britt, I could not have done this without somebody who actually knows what they're talking about in animation. So
let's stumble through.
Thank you, though, for being here with me. For people who don't know where they can find you, why don't you plug all your good stuff as well?
Oh, gosh, yes. So I'm a part of a podcast called 1001 by 1 by 3, where we go through the book 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. We discuss some of the movies that are in the book, some that aren't in the book, some that we just want to talk about. We discuss them, we analyze them, and we decide whether or not we think they should be in the book. I do that podcast with my good friends Adam and Joey, and it's a riot. Please check us out. We drop episodes most Fridays. It's either an off season one or a part of our season. And then if you want to find me, I'm somewhat on the socials. And you can find me under Britsby Hobnob at Blue Sky, where I'm probably the most active. Instagram. And what else? Yep, that's basically it, right? That's all I do. And if you want to find 1001, it's 1001 by 1 pod on TikTok and Instagram and X. And yeah, we're nice. Come say hi.
And if you enjoyed listening to Britt and me banter a little bit, the week after this interview drops, you can go over to 1001 by 1, where I was a guest on the craziest episode I've ever done with anyone ever. And we talked about the wonderful film Salo, or the 120 Days of Sodom.
Weird flick to bring up on this happy podcast about animation. But it genuinely great episode. Like, very fun. Surprising considering the content. Again, content warning. It's not an easy episode to listen to, but we had a few laughs.
That's true.
And some of them were about animation, actually. So
that's true. Yes, if you had fun with animation, step over and listen to us talk about Salo. It'll be a great time.
It's a hoot.
Well, now I gotta go watch Salo.
Have fun.
The perfect way to end your evening.
You don't need to watch it 600 times like Andrew did for our podcast, and he mentioned it, and I went, nobody asked you to. You chose this path.
It's true. I'm probably on some sort of government watch list, unfortunately.
100%.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for being here. It was an absolute blast having Nick on, having Britt back to hang out again. I look forward to having you back for another interview down the road some point, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much again.
Absolutely.